All right, all right. Happy Sunday, guys. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Marcus Cage. He's the host of The Political Matrix, or he's one of the co-hosts of The Political Matrix. Welcome back, Marcus.
Thank you for having me back.
All right, so we're going to get into this first story here coming out of Virginia Beach. For those of you that live in the VA, we got to make sure that we highlight stories like this because I feel like this story in particular is not being talked about so far from what I've seen on YouTube, and people need to know what's going on. So Dr. Raven Baxter, also known as Raven the Science Maven. So she's actually not just your ordinary doctor. She's actually pretty well known in Virginia. She's done a lot for kids when it comes to helping kids get into science. So this is like her big thing. She's been on the news before because of her work. But recently she experienced something that I think a lot of people just don't talk about, or they're not aware that it happened. So this story came in here and it was covered by the Daily Mail, but it was also covered by the New York Times. It says Black molecular biologist is banned from buying a $749,000 Virginia Beach condo because of her race by white owner, who the white owner is 84 years old. It says Jane Walker, 84, allegedly refused to sell a condo to Dr. Raven Baxter over race. So I just want to read this first part here so you guys understand what's going on. It says a molecular biologist says that she was prevented from buying the Virginia Beach condo of her dreams after the white owner learned that she was Black, it is alleged. Dr. Raven Baxter, 30, she's 30 years old, very well accomplished for 30, was prepared to buy the home after a virtual tour of the property. It had everything she wanted: a private foyer, wainscoting, exquisite crown molding, and a marble fireplace. Baxter offered the asking price, $749,000. So she didn't even offer less or try to negotiate with the asking price. It was promptly accepted by the seller. The molecular biologist, who works remotely for Mount Sinai Hospital, then sent over a down payment and the condo went into escrow. But then she received a call late at night from the broker who told her that the seller, Jane Walker, 84, now wanted to back out of the deal. He said, I don't know how to tell you this, but she doesn't want to sell the home to you, and it's because you're Black. Marcus, I want to first go to you.
Yeah, when you sent this story over to me and I read it, and I'm like, how? I mean, they people are normally not as so open and like tipping their hand. They normally find some other excuse. Oh well, I think we're gonna keep it in the family, or I think my daughter, and they come up with some kind of other excuses. So it's kind of a little rare that it's so flagrant that she just basically came out and said, oh, it's because of race. And the fact that the brokers who were involved in this relayed the message to her is kind of shocking to me also, because I'm like, you guys are supposed to already nip that in the bud before it even gets back to the purchaser. Crazy story.
That's right. And I want to show people the property here as well, because some people were asking on social media, where did she find a house like that in Virginia Beach? It's not a house, it's a condo. Okay, so Virginia Beach is expensive for those who are not aware. I've lived in Virginia Beach. I have family that live in that area. It is very expensive. So it was a condo in this building. So, right, it says the Gone with the Wind inspired property is near the beach and features stunning views of the Atlantic. And it goes on to say here, earlier that day, the scientist and her longtime boyfriend, Dr. Ronald Gamble Jr., a theoretical physicist who works for NASA. So again, these are two people who are doing pretty well financially. They're doing better off than I am. Okay, so it's not like we can't even say that she was discriminated against because they don't have enough money or they didn't offer enough for the condo. So these are very very well off people financially. Says that he made the 3-hour drive to the condo from their apartment in Alexandria, Virginia. Alexandria, Virginia, also very expensive. Anywhere near DC is expensive. I'm just going to tell you guys. For the first time, the two scientists explored the property in person. When Baxter had previously toured the condo virtually, her camera had been off. Jane Walker, the seller, was unaware of her race, which, as she should be. It should not matter what color the buyer is. After concluding their inspection of the property, which is near the beach and features a view of the Atlantic, they bumped into the seller. As the couple prepared to leave, Walker appeared and her agent, Susan Pender of Berkshire Hathaway RW Town Realty, introduced the two parties. So for those who were wondering, this is how the seller found out that the buyer was Black. Moments after the scientists left, Baxter said Walker confronted her agent, telling her that she was not willing to sell her condo to a Black person. Walker ordered Pender to terminate the sale. Pender called Wayne Miller, an agent at 757 Realty, and informed him of the turn of events. Miller proceeded to contact Baxter's agent, Bill Loftus, who called her with the troubling news. Baxter was crushed to hear that the seller was reneging. She loved the condo. It's a classic home with a ton of character. It's absolutely gorgeous. You can walk to the beach. It was like a steal. I basically put in an offer sight unseen. According to the condo Zillow page, the Georgian style property was built in 1932. It has a spiral staircase, kind of like Gone with the Wind. I'll show you guys the picture here. So it's very pretty. And by the way, condos are not necessarily just one level. Like you can have condos that have multiple floors. A friend of mine lived in a condo that was like 3 stories. So it doesn't have to be, people think it's just an apartment. No, like it can look like this. And so apparently after this happened, she took to Twitter, and I'll get into the Twitter post in just a second, because that's how I believe mainstream media caught wind of this story. But Marcus, this speaks to something, and this is why it's frustrating to me when people say, don't talk about race, just talk about class. Because here is someone who is obviously, when we're talking about class, she's in a class that I'm definitely not in. She's a doctor.
Yeah.
She's a doctor. Her boyfriend's a doctor, and she's a well-known doctor. It's not like she just works at a hospital. Like Dr. Raven, the science maven, is a brand. So she's known for doing a lot of things like with her career. But this is a situation where the seller clearly stated, allegedly, that she did not want to sell the condo to a Black person. Your take on that?
It's even crazier because this would be what would be considered like so-called the cream of the crop of the upper Black community. And this is somebody who, they didn't get it from some rap deal or playing basketball or something like this. This is a accomplished intellectual and her longtime boyfriend. These are two, like, the types of young pillars of the community which you would aspire your kids to be like. And some of us, even as adults, we aspire to be like them. But when people who are obviously living everything, lives that are on the up and up and trying to do well and trying to do good for themselves and trying to actually help the surrounding society that they live in, are still going through this. So when people use excuse, oh, well, it's because they had loud music, or, oh, I saw this ghetto-ness, and no, scratch that. There's some people who clearly it's going to be on the basis of race alone, and it don't have to go more than that. I would also throw in some of these like land covenants and things like this. They started off in areas like Virginia and a little north of that because of Black people who were either buying their way out of slavery and things like that, and started purchasing plots of land or trying to rent out places. And this has a long history. It's sad to see this still going on.
Another thing too that I want to mention, because like I said, I lived in the Virginia Beach area. I have family in the DMV. For those who don't know, it's DC, Maryland, Virginia. Just saying.
I was there in the military too, in
Yeah,
Norfolk area for a while.
yeah, so it's not uncommon to meet Black people, particularly Black families in that area that are very well off. That is one thing I will say. The difference between living in Massachusetts and living in that area is that in Massachusetts, number one, there aren't as many Black people here, and there are fewer Black professionals. But when you go to that area, there are a lot of Black professionals. There are a lot of Black people also that are part of what we call the boule, that are part of that group.
Yeah. Well, think not only do you have government officials, you have members of their staff, you have lobbyists, you have a lot of law form, what is it? Law branches. You have a lot of doctors, professionals. You have a lot of scientists in that area. You have a lot of high skilled jobs that are in that area, and so it attracts some of the best talent through all the different race groups. So you're going to have a lot more minorities who are doing well versus the typical areas where it might be dilapidated areas where you might have some of the people who are just more working class. So more the Black people you're going to have in these areas are going to be the ones who would fall into the boule or the PMC class.
That's right. That's why it's funny when people call me PMC, because I'm just like, honey, I don't make that kind of money. I don't even walk in those circles. Danny said Cambridge, Massachusetts. No, Cambridge has become very bougie. Is pretty hipster like. There aren't as many Black people in Cambridge as there used to be. You'd be surprised. But
the Cornell types.
Yeah, especially when you compare it to Maryland and Virginia, anywhere near that DC area, you're going to see, more diversity, but not just more diversity, but I'm talking about you're going to see more Black people that own homes. And you don't see that much here where I live in Massachusetts. But she took to Twitter, and I believe this is what got the attention of the New York Times, because they were the first ones to break this story. She said, my real estate agent's broker just called me at 9 p.m. on a Friday to tell me that the seller doesn't want to sell a house to me because I am Black. This is after the inspection, the contract agreement, the down payment. Baby, I'm either buying your house or buying your block. Choose one. So again, it's not like you said, this wasn't like a rapper, basketball, but even if it was, still, this woman is a doctor.
Yeah. Well, another thing I would throw in is I think the reason why it probably did catch the New York Times attention, for one, she had already kind of went a little bit more viral with some of her writing, some of her speeches that she's done. She had a couple she reviewed an album or something, and she got a little attention for that. And I think that the people in that DC area, they're so used to seeing so many different people from so many different walks of life, whether you're Black, Latino, Native American, LGBTQ. And so in that PMC kind of DMV bubble, you start thinking that the rest of the country is like this, and we're living kind of in a post-racist society. And then something like this it snaps them out of it. And it's not that this is a one-off. It's just that this is somebody who's on the radar that got this attention because of how esteemed they are. And it's not to take away or put her in they're treating her special because of this. It's the fact that a lot of these PMCs and people who work in the boule, or not boule, but the people who are in this kind of like neoliberal kind of bubble, they don't catch into the average working class person like me or Sabby or some of you out there. When it happens to us, it's like, yeah, whatever, you're just complaining. But somebody who has a profile, it's a lot harder to ignore an injustice like this when it happens to them.
Right, because I covered the story last year. I don't know if everybody remembers, but last year, the 90-year-old Black woman in South Carolina, she was being sued by developers because she was unwilling to sell her land, which had been in her family for decades. So instead of her suing them because they were trying to pressure her, they sued her. And that story made like local news, but a lot of people did not even talk about that story. I'm like, does everybody see what's happening here? How these developers are coming in and pushing people like off of their land. So it does happen, but you can see even on her Twitter page, like I said, this is not someone who was just not, you know what I mean? Like Raven Baxter, PhD, molecular biologist, science educator, director at the Science Haven, which is a nonprofit that she has. If you go here, the pinned tweet on her page, y'all, we did it. I had a wild idea to get 100 telescopes to 100 kids across the country and give them astronomy education to inspire the next generation of science. And you rallied behind me and we got it done. I cannot thank you enough for your support. Thank you. Thank you. And I can't really play the news clip on here because that's local news and they'll have copyright. But what I'm saying is that she's been on the media before because of her nonprofit, because of what she's done for kids in science. So again, to Marcus's point, if this was someone like if it was me or Marcus that this happened to, it probably wouldn't have received as much attention. But she is known. She is known. And people need to understand that there is racism in real estate. I went through the home buying process. I know from experience, there is racism in real estate and it still exists today. And those beach communities, because I can tell you a little thing about Virginia Beach. Those beach communities are hella racist.
Yeah, I lived in Atlantic Beach and in Jacksonville area. And so I could understand how some of these things go down. And another thing that I feel should definitely be highlighted in a situation like this is the fact that it was kind of leaked out, that the seller kind of told on herself. And a lot of times what might happen in situations like this is the broker might come up with an excuse for them, even when they tell them directly. So the information doesn't go from broker to you. You don't hear the reason why. You just hear that the sale fell through. And so all you can do is kind of wonder and not be sure. You're like, wait a minute, I didn't even try to negotiate you. I didn't try to talk you down. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I'm already coming with I'm putting my money where my mouth is. And I'm saying, let's do this deal, and giving you no reasons to have pause or concern. And this, sometimes when you have these situations, it shows you that it's clearly just about race, and you can't just ignore the racial aspects of things. And I feel this is something that some of our peers and colleagues, especially in the independent media sphere, have a problem with, because this is something that they're not facing and they're not dealing with. So it's one, I'm not saying that they don't have their issues, because we all have our different issues we have to deal with. But if you're not having to go through something, it's easier for you to dismiss it. I don't know what it's like to be a 110-pound girl, 5'3", walking around in the middle of the night. I don't know I don't know that fear, because I don't have to deal with that. And we have to be able to put ourselves in each other's shoes if we're actually going to be allies and realize the situations that we're having, especially with racial issues.
This is very good points. And some people don't want to talk about it because they don't want to upset their audience. It's just the reality of the situation. I've told people before, you can like it or not like it, but either way, I really don't give a damn. I'm not going to sit up here and pretend like these things are not happening so that you can feel comfortable. And some people have done that. And it goes on to say here, I want to show you the response that this person made. Sachaluk, they were replying to Raven. They said, that's illegal. You should report the broker immediately to the Department of Professional Regulation. We are bound by ethics to refuse to represent a client who expressed racial discrimination. Yeah, it's illegal, but that doesn't mean it. This is the thing to kill me when people come in and they say that's illegal. Just because something is illegal doesn't mean it's not happening.
I mean, great point. Another thing that I would throw in is, just because they might have come to some resolution quickly and then, oh, well, they say, because in the article it says that her kids like changed her mind or something like that. Nonetheless, those brokers still are in violation themselves for hearing the said reason that the seller chose. That she decided to not want to sell on a racial basis is still illegal. And the fact that they didn't decide, you know what, it doesn't matter. It's out of your hands. We're selling this. We're the broker. We're not going to allow your reason, because it goes against actually two different laws. What was it, 1968? And I believe it's like 1880s law that had to do with racial discrimination and rights.
Yeah. Another thing too, for people who haven't been through like this experience, the home buying experience and stuff like that. Some of the realtors too can also be racist. And what they'll try to do is, like, if you say, I want to look at this house in this neighborhood or whatever, and they see you, because the realtor does meet you.
Mm-hmm.
Like they know who you are, right? All of a sudden, the house that's for sale isn't for sale anymore, depending on what you look like. But then your white friend gets to look at the house.
Yep.
And this is the thing, like Cory Booker talked about this before, and I have many criticisms for Cory Booker, but he talked about his parents going through this back when he was, a kid, right? When he was growing up. But that was decades ago. These things still happen. Realtors have been known to pretend like all of a sudden these houses are not for sale based on what you look like. Oh no, we don't want to put you into that community. Now, how does that affect your family dynamic? Because we all know that zip codes matter when it comes to a public education system in this country. So obviously the schools that are in neighborhoods that have more property tax, that are funded more by the property taxes, those schools are heavily resourced. So this is how sometimes, and you see this especially here in Massachusetts, in the Eastern Massachusetts area, this is why you'll see people that are Black lawyers and Black doctors, and people say, why do you live in Dorchester? Why do you live in Roxbury? Why do you live in Mattapan? You're a doctor. Why aren't you living out in the suburbs somewhere like in Lexington or Concord or whatever? Because they are not welcome there.
Mm-hmm. Well, another thing that I would throw in, and it's a great point you bringing up the education system. Well, there's so many other aspects. You factor in health as far as the medical facilities that are around you. You factor in possible crime rates, and because you might not have been able to get into this certain area that you wanted to get into that might have really good property values, and will have I'm trying to remember, what is it that you put in it, equity. That'll build equity. You might not be able to get that being forced into certain areas because of crime rate, because of vacancy, of the amount of residents. All of those things have to factor in. And then also to compound with that, environmental issues. Some certain areas, they decide, well, we're just going to build a bunch of power lines right above your house. And how does that affect the family down the road? And so all of these different, unseen taxes that are put on you by some of this racism, that it can just be the broker, it could be the seller, it could be some kind of laws that, or it can be the banks. Even the banks, your bank can decide, oh, well, we're not going to give it to them for that. Or we think Sabby makes enough, so you know what? We're just going to throw her percentage is going to be a little bit higher per month. And so all of these things we have to factor in. And if you look at the history in most major cities, how this has been going on, how this added taxes has really taxed the Black community and the wealth of the Black community overall by charging more and by not being able to get as much equity built into our places, because most people, their actual wealth comes from the properties that they own. And if you're boxed out, that's something that you're losing out on.
That's right. And Maddie, thank you so much for saying this. The suburbs were built on white flight. And that's another thing. You got to think back to, during white flight, how Black people were shut out of those suburban communities. It's not that even Black families that had the money to move there, they were shut out, not just by the communities, but also by the banks that didn't want to give loans to them. No, we don't want you to come into that neighborhood. So when white people left the inner city and moved into the suburbs, they took their wealth and their money with them. And that's why the schools in the inner city are under resourced and under, service, because when you take the wealth with you, remember, public schools are funded by property taxes. So, and that's how, and guess who got stuck in the inner cities because of those policies?
Yeah, I would throw in, imagine on the flip side, if you took the lower income, predominantly white areas like trailer parks and things like that, and all you force those into the suburban areas. What would that do to the property values, the crime rates, and all those different things like that, the taxes that go in for the schools? What would that do overall? And that's how you have to look at it. Let's say, for instance, that you by boxing people out of a certain area, you're adding taxes onto them, and that's an unseen tax that's not factored into why we have this huge wealth gap between the Black and white community.
Yeah, it's really sad, like what has happened, and I'm glad that her story is receiving attention. That the New York Times, as bad as their journalism can be, I'm glad
Mhm.
that they covered that story and allowed it to receive national attention. But the reality is, guys, it's not just Dr. Raven that this is happening to.
Nope. Sadly, we wish that this could be a one-off and the situation can be resolved and we get past it. But there are more situations like this that are going on currently and that are going to be going on in the future. And it's going to take for people to be diligent. I'm so glad that Sabby is covering this story, and more people need to. When you see something, say something. When you see situations like this is the only way we can actually have any kind of impact or change it, by shedding light on the problems, because you can't address a problem if you don't know there's a problem.
That's right. And it's not just, rejecting people that are trying to buy homes that have already put down the down payment. It's also pushing people out of the communities that they do already exist in. It's the gentrification, which is
Mhm.
happening heavily here in Boston. It's been happening for years, but it's getting even worse. It happened in DC and is continuing to happen. New York City, all these big, like, major
Out here
cities.
where I am, LA.
Exactly. And so these people who grew up in those communities are being pushed out of those communities, and they now have a longer commute to work. And if you live in an area where the public transportation is bad, or you just don't have a car and you need to have a car, like I would imagine in
Mhm.
LA, you need to have a car,
Oh
like
yeah.
that makes it harder for you to get back and forth to work. Now you're talking about people being pushed out of Roxbury, being pushed out of Dorchester. People have been pushed out of Cambridge, further south into southern part of Massachusetts, or further north into northern Massachusetts, into places where there is no public transportation, but that's where they have to live because that's where they can afford. The reality is here, the towns that have public transportation, that have that access, are more expensive to live in. So
Yep.
people who can't afford that are going to go to the towns that don't have public transportation. But now that may mean they may have a 2-hour commute to work. So this
Hmm.
is not a quality of life that we should have in this country, regardless. And when people bring up the situation with the workers, I want to remind everyone, Black people, the majority of Black people, are working class.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you were talking about the commute time, just for measure, I work about 7.5 miles from my home. It takes me on average roughly about 35 minutes on a good day to 45 minutes or more to get back and forth from work to home. Now imagine if I live 15 miles away. We're talking about an over an hour commute to work and home. How much time does that take away from you and your family? How much wear and tear is it on your vehicle, the stop and go, the stop and go? All of those things have to be factored into what's going on in these situations like this.
That's right. And it's just an ongoing issue. So you guys, if you're not familiar with her, give her a follow on Twitter. Again, this is Dr. Raven, the science maven. Give her a follow on Twitter. She already has over 165,000 followers. Like I said, she's not just she's not just
Well,
like,
I'll definitely be following her now, especially when I heard about the thing you sent me about the telescopes, because I remember something that was like a pivotal thing for me in my childhood, with like the chemistry sets and the telescopes and things that my mom would give me. And it was fascinating to me as a young kid, and how it piques your mind to be interested in so many of the other things than just the typical, social media stuff that kids are seeing now in school. And it can kickstart a whole new generation of scientists and engineers. And that's something that we definitely need more of, no matter which which group you fall into, black, white, other. But these are the kind of people that needed to be uplifted in this society. Less Cardi B's and Meg Thee Stallions and Jay-Z's and stuff, but this is what I would like to see, more leadership like this, and these are the people we need to applaud.
I agree. And I want to also mention this as well. Thank you, James. Don't forget the New Deal under FDR imposed redlining on Black veterans, and they could not get homes under the GI Bill. This is why it used to piss me off when people say that they were a FDR Democrat. I'm like, what does that even mean?
Well, what FDR did in particular, bringing up FDR, he refined some of these racist policies, because when I was some of my research I've looked into, a lot of the early redlining goes back to, believe it or not, your state that you're in right now goes to Massachusetts. And it was 1840s time period, roughly about 20 years or so, roughly 20 to 30 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. And the reason why is you were starting to see more and more inventions and things like that, which were decreasing some of the plantations' need for manual labor. And so even before the Civil War, it was starting to become a cost analysis, and it's kind of weird. We're in this same situation now with more automation and things, which is threatening workers' careers and jobs. But now some of them they didn't care. They just were going to be brutal and horrible to people and keep people in slavery anyway. But with the machines and stuff, you saw more people were starting to get out of slavery or even escape, and they were moving to these northern states. And these northern states and western states, the so-called free states, were the ones who were putting a lot of these redlining laws into play before the end of slavery. And so they were getting themselves ahead of the curve. And then what happened is the southern states eventually started to follow suit. And so tying that up to the New Deal, all they did was they tweaked some things. And that's where you started seeing more covenant laws being spread across the country, which a lot of that happened in the early 1900s, like 1905, 1910, 1920, where if you had a grandparent who was a descendant of slavery, you couldn't own this property. And this went past the person who owned the house all the way back to developers also.
That's right. Marcus, thank you so much. Before you go, where can people find you?
Well, you guys can find me over at the Political Matrix here on YouTube, or you guys can check me out on the Rockfin side. I'm at Real Marcus J Cage or at Marcus James Cage, and I'm typically not hard to find. If you guys want to chat me up or send me a story that you'd like to see me cover on the show, just send it my way. Thank you again, Sabby, for having me here. It's always an honor to be with you.
Yeah, guys, make sure you support Black content creators for real, because the struggle is real.
I wanted to say one more thing. If you guys know of other Black content creators out there that are not getting enough shine, not that I have a big platform at all, but my goal is to try to work on more collaboration with more Black content creators so that you guys can hear more of our voices instead of some of our allies speaking for us. So if you guys can, send those to me, send those to Sabby, and we can start getting more collaborations. You guys can hear directly from us our views, because it's not like you just get me and then you get Sabby's views, or you just get Nick and then you get or you get Nico, or you get Chris, my co-host. All of us have our own different takes. We agree on plenty of things. There's things that we're going to have little nuanced differences, and you actually get to hear really what the Black community thinks if you can hear more Black voices.
Yes, definitely. And definitely send that my way, because a lot of times, I may just not know because the algorithm is not showing them to me. So
yes.
All right, Marcus, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.